We're joined now by Bruce Campbell, Portfolio Manager at StoneCastle Investment Management, for the weekly StoneCastle Cannabis Industry Update. Bruce, welcome.
Yeah, thanks for having me after a couple of weeks of being off, right?
You bet. So, big news this week. Canopy Growth gets a new CEO. David Klein, the former Executive Vice President of Marketing and CFO of Constellation Brands, starts on the 20th of January. Mark Zakulin, who's been the interim CEO, steps down officially on, I guess it's the 20th of December. What's your take on that transition?
I mean, it's probably not that surprising given, the noise that Constellation's been making in the past about, not being happy with what's gone on with the financials, that they would then put in, somebody who was formerly the CFO into that role. I guess going forward now we won't have, he'll probably need a few quarters to get things done the way he wants them. But then at that point in time, there'll be really no excuses for why the performance on the financial standpoint isn't there, right?
Yeah, well, I mean, industry metrics worldwide notwithstanding. Do you think that, what is Constellation going to be able to do that Bruce Linton and Mark Zakulin weren't able to do?
Well, I mean, I think the big thing is you'll see a real more solid focus on cost control and probably generating numbers. Whereas, Bruce's vision all along was that, he was going to grow this thing and really capture real estate and market share, kind of over the next 5 years. That was probably 2 or 3 years ago now that he said that. And then, at that point in time, he'd have such a dominant brand and such a lead over everyone else that, he would just then at that point in time switch gears, and then, the cash flow generation would begin. And, I don't think necessarily that's within the right time frame for most investors these days, especially if they've written a check for $5 billion.
Right. It occurred to me that that Constellation Brands, if they were to exercise any more of their rights to acquire continuing growing incremental ownership in Canopy, that they would have to start to report Canopy's financials blended into their own financials, which is probably not something they want to do at this point, and understandably so. Do you think that there's any sort of buyer's remorse on the part of Constellation Management at this point?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to say, right? It's one of those things that, presuming they went into this with long-term goals and long-term, kind of agenda, and it really hasn't been that long if you sort of think of the grand scheme of things. With the rollout and the way things have transpired in Canada, I got to believe that they're probably a little disappointed by the, sort of short-term numbers. But, longer term, I can't believe that they did this as an investment in Canada. They probably could have done it a lot cheaper and a lot different way if they had been just looking at it from that perspective. Instead, I think they're really looking at this from, how do we build a global brand here? And Canopy has the head start, so let's invest in them. And then, we have the option to take them out down the road. So if you were sitting in their chair, I mean, obviously they get pressure just like any other public company does on the quarter, but longer term is what they had to be thinking. That was probably that 3 to 5 years out, and they were also probably thinking about once you saw legalization in the U.S. and in many other jurisdictions, probably including Europe.
Right. Okay, and let's see, other hot news this week. Dollar General has announced that they are going to be selling CBD cosmetics. And I was curious about that announcement because the FDA has really started to, exhibit a lot of pressure against companies placing CBD on the label. And in fact, a lot of the companies have preemptively switched the reference to CBD on labels to just hemp, because hemp is not controversial, whereas the use of the word CBD relative to any claim made is somewhat controversial. How does that affect the cosmetics industry? And obviously, if an entity like Dollar General, Dean, has probably done their homework on what they can and can't say, but is this sort of like a strategic move to be first, or is it just a well thought out strategic initiative that is more of a part of a longer term play for Dollar General?
Yeah, I think it has to do with a bigger global trend. We had actually heard, we've been trying to actually verify this and have been able to, that the Body Shop, that their highest selling product globally is a product that contains CBD. So I'd imagine that Dollar General is probably looking at that and saying, hey, we need to get into this this area. If you look at Sephora, the makeup retailer, and look what they've done, they've had great success with CBD products. So, I think as long as they probably don't make specific claims right now, they're okay with the FDA. You obviously want to stay away from those claims. And as you said, there's some companies that are probably switching to the word hemp now, because most consumers recognize, I think, now that CBD is from hemp. There's other CBD that you can generate from other products as well. So, you can actually generate CBD from pine, from what I understand. So, they could actually go out and generate that from other products. But hemp and CBD are pretty well associated, so they can use that. Not completely interchangeable, but I think most consumers understand that that's where it comes from. So that would be my take. And I think they just look at it from a market standpoint and think the size of the market's massive. And so, we kind of want to be involved. And if you think back to April when, the Kardashians had that baby shower where they were giving away CBD gifts, it kind of falls right into their marketing realm as well.
You bet. Okay, so along those lines, the Canadian cannabis sales numbers came out this week, and it was interesting that the per capita spend varies so widely, province to province, and maybe you could comment on those numbers and what the significance of the huge variance is.
Yeah, and it comes down to what all the producers have been saying about retail and retail locations. So, if you look at Alberta, they were up there on the per capita basis. I think it was $45 that they were at. And if you look at BC at 10 and Ontario at 15, I think that has a big reason is just the number of retail locations. You also look into those numbers a little further, and they talk about the distance the average person has to go to find a cannabis store. In Ontario, I think it was 34 kilometers, if I remember correctly, which is a long ways. I mean, if you go back to really how retail works, typically in a category like this, it's proximity to where you go to get home. And so, if you look at liquor retailing, that's why we see so many liquor outlets. I think there's 2,200 plus in Ontario alone. And so, it really has that habit forming that, you leave work, you stop at the liquor store and you go home. It'll be the same with cannabis for the most part. I mean, there might be specialty stores that have something special that you go to, but for the most part, it's going to be, where you can get it conveniently. And if you have to drive 34 kilometers, that's a ways, right? That's a 45-minute trip just to go get get cannabis, and depending on what city you're in, it could be even longer. Whereas the black market right now, you could probably still get it delivered to your house, or by someone within probably a couple hours, or at the very worst, you can go online to the old black market retailers and arrives in the mail the next day. So that's really the competition, and just really drives the point home that retail still is the issue, and we need to get more retail stores out there.
Right, interesting. Do you think that the very low number in BC is an indication of a higher patronage of the black market in BC relative to the legal market?
Yeah, I would think that that's the case for sure. Plus, the number of retail locations there still aren't that many retail locations. I was on a speaking tour here a couple of weeks ago, and I was in Vancouver and spoke to a number of people, and they were saying, that's the biggest issue that they run into is just proximity and where they can get it.
Mm-hmm. Certainly, the idea that residents of BC don't smoke too much weed relative to the rest of the country is not very, very realistic, having lived in BC for 30 years practically. Interesting. Okay, well, the Canadian companies are under more pressure than the U.S. MSOs at this point, and you've got no end of U.S. analysts promoting the idea that U.S. MSOs are, in fact, a buy right now, whereas Canadian incumbents might be a little bit behind the eight ball. So we're starting to see a lot of the Canadians try to flesh out their future with international deals. And I think that Valens Growworks recently, or I think it was today, announced a partnership that sort of supports that premise.
Yeah, exactly. So they previously had done this deal with Terraquino out of Washington for their source technology, which is a water soluble, tasteless, odorless technology that they have for beverages, and Valens had got that technology and did their deal for Canada, and now they just signed an extension to that to be North America, or sorry, not North America, the rest of the world, and so you'll see Europe and a few other jurisdictions. And so you really see that they're looking at that, thinking, okay, we're going to sell product beyond Canada and beyond the borders. So interesting that Valens is making that move, and also that Terrakino was willing to partner up with them again.
You bet. So you mentioned earlier that the technicals in the industry, across the cannabis industry, are improving, and maybe you could illuminate that idea for us a little bit.
Yeah, so we watch a lot of different technical indicators in our office, and a couple of the ones that we've noticed that recently are changing are for canopy. And so, if you sort of look at one of the tools that we use is called a relative rotation graph, and it looks like the change in momentum, and the change in momentum has recently started to improve with canopy. You've seen that transpire a little bit from the stock price. It's off its bottom by probably 20% or more here now. You've also started to see some of the traditional momentum indicators. So the one that we look at is a weekly MACD, which is a moving average tool, and it's recently changed back to positive after being negative since basically April. So it looks like we're starting to see a bit of a change in the tide here. I suspect that once we get through tax loss selling, probably later next week, most people probably don't wait right until the 27th to do that, that you should start to see, probably some of the lid that's been on some of these stocks start to be removed. And then, obviously if there was any type of catalyst, and we never know what those are, but if there was any type of catalyst, that would obviously, be ripe for the sector to have a fairly quick move here.
You bet. All right, Bruce, that's a great update as per usual. We're going to leave it there for now and come back to you next week. Thanks very much for your contribution as usual.
Okay, thanks a lot.